Good afternoon. My name is Amelia and I am the Customer Service Officer at the Design and Technology Association. Part of my remit as Customer Service Officer is to work with our Blueprint members. And today we have Nye and we have Charlie, they're from Echo Brand Design, and they will be discussing sustainability in industry with you. If anybody has any questions, please do pop them in the chat. We'd be more than happy to run through them with you. That's the royal way, because it'll be Charlie and I answering. But do pop them in, and I'm sure that they'll be able to answer that for you. I'm going to hand over. Is it you starting today, Charlie?
Yeah, I'm going to drive.
Okay, exciting. So I'm going to hand over to Charlie, and hopefully we can run through this, and it'll be very interesting and exciting. Okay.
Cool, thank you, Amelia. Let me share my screen. Hopefully this will all go smoothly. Let's make that big. I know you're all on mute, but if you can't see it, please shout now. Okay, I'm going to take that as that you can. So as Amelia said, we're Echo. We're a strategic design and innovation agency. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you might understand a little bit more about the kind of stuff that we do. But it's really nice to be here and get to present to all of you guys. I think we're talking about sustainability in design today, which is a topic that's kind of super close to our hearts. So we really hope that it will kind of be informative and interesting for all of you guys. So I'm Charlie. I'm Strategy Director at Echo. That basically means that I'm involved in kind of all of the thinking stuff that we do. And we're a small team, but we have kind of a really diverse range of different kind of clients and projects. And that means that what myself and I do is super varied. So, you know, one day we might be in a kind of workshop talking about kind of creating a brand identity from scratch. The next day we might be writing a single copy line that's going to go on a poster in an airport, and kind of everything in between. But a big part of what we do as well is kind of innovation and helping our clients kind of big and small work out sort of where they need to be kind of heading in the future, whether that's in the next sort of 2 years, 5, or even kind of 10 or 15, kind of creating that future vision of how they need to evolve. And I think sustainability kind of fits really, really importantly in with innovation, because, you know, there's these huge kind of goals that we need to get to together, you know, as a country, as a society, but, you know, even with kind of legislation. So it's a big part of what absolutely everyone's thinking about. And so it needs to be baked into kind of everything that we do. So yeah, that's sort of by day, you know, creating brand identities. And just to keep this fun and light, I thought I would just embarrass myself a little bit, not sure why now. But I also like to extend that kind of identity building outside of work too. So, you know, creating characters and creating stories and sort of not taking myself too seriously. So, hi, that's me.
And then that segues nicely into me. So hi, I'm Nye. I'm a strategist at Echo. And yeah, sustainability, I suppose, is quite a topic that I've been in and around for a long period of time. My actually academic background is climate science and glaciology. So it's something that's been around with me for quite a number of years, well over a decade. But it's nice to see how the evolution of that conversation has changed from academia into broader society, and then how it's playing out on the global stage with brands and consumers at the moment. And yeah, I think Charlie sort of explained very, very nicely what our day to day is at Echo. My by day is very much sort of covered by Charlie. By night, it was relatively straightforward. A little bit of my academic sort of shots there, and a little bit of my career changing from some science and academia into photography, marketing, and design before I eventually became a strategist at Echo earlier, the beginning of this year. And if you move on, this was originally almost like a placeholder, because when Charlie said I'm usually sharing pictures of her life, I said I'm not doing that. So this was a sort of placeholder to represent my lonely existence by comparison.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I almost don't need this slide. I can see a few of your faces, which is wonderful, but just a sort of I guess plea, if anyone does fancy kind of putting their camera on, putting their microphone on, being brave, then we're all for that. But we also appreciate, you might be snuggling up in your favorite comfy chair, downing some coffee or whatever. So we understand, but it would be lovely to see your faces. And also we know that you're going to be deep in thought listening to our incredibly intelligent presentation, but please do feel free to kind of ask questions. We're going to have a little Q&A at the end, but like Amelia said, if you want to kind of put anything in the chat, we can come and kind of run through those at the end. So it'd be really lovely just to answer some questions at the end, so do scribble some down as we go. I guess that was that slide. I raced ahead. You got it. Ask questions. Cool. So enough preamble. Let's dive into the content. So over to you again, Nye.
So sustainability, what is it? If you move on to the next slide, I suppose there's two parts of this I kind of want to just touch on. I suppose there's the actual definition of sustainability, which is the idea of this sort of creating an equilibrium, a bit of a balance between how we use the resources and how those resources are replenished to maintain a level that allows us to fill the needs of today without compromising the needs of the future generations. But there's also this bigger idea about sustainability, which is the sustainability movement that is going on, and this sort of the sustainability revolution that we're kind of in the midst of. And it sort of does take the idea of maintaining that balance, but to the point where we're not at that equilibrium yet. It's almost like that end goal that we're sort of working towards. It's how do we make incremental changes and incremental improvements that get to a point where we're actually able to have a bit of harmony with the earth, and that sort of takes into account our use of those resources. It takes into account recyclability, the circular economy, and regeneration that are part of that conversation and part of that step change towards a more balanced society, but also eventually the regenerative and circularity part of the sustainability topic will hopefully at some point in the future overtake, and then then the conversation shifts from balance to how do we bring the planet back towards its sort of natural state. So there's the sort of the duality of sustainability today.
And I think when we say sustainability, everyone jumps to that kind of environmental picture. You think of kind of Amazonian rainforests and plastic bags, but actually there's, it's a bit of a broader kind of subject matter, and there are kind of different parts of it, some of which we will touch on a little bit today. So you've got kind of human, social, economic, and environmental. So what do those mean? Okay, a lot of text here. But human sustainability really is all about kind of improving the lives of individuals and making sure that things are as good for as many people as possible for as long as possible. So it's about sort of investing in health and education, anything from encouraging people to eat more fruit and vegetables, excuse me, to moving more and exercising, to making sure that people have access to education and healthcare, so that kind of individuals can really flourish. And then you have social, which is very similar, but rather than thinking about individuals, it's thinking about it's in the name, society as a whole. So, you know, what is good for kind of communities? So again, some kind of similar touch points as human, but kind of thinking about those services that start to allow kind of groups to flourish. So on the picture, we have a kind of library on wheels. So making sure that communities have access to education, so that it kind of really improves everything about their lives. And that can feed into other types of sustainability as well. If we educate society on it, then they're going to kind of do good, and we create this virtuous circle. You know, these are all kind of connected with one another, and there's some lovely kind of synergies and blurred lines. Economic sustainability sort of does what it says on the tin. You know, it's talking about economic opportunities, making sure that kind of the standard of living is sustainable, that people have access to, you know, things that are going to enable them to grow and to flourish financially. And, you know, if you think about kind of the state of a lot of high streets up and down kind of different towns, that's an example where kind of economic sustainability perhaps hasn't been sort of championed or successful, because businesses have kind of, you know, they've gone under and there's been nothing there to kind of come up and replace them. So economic sustainability is about, okay, well, how do we redefine the role of our town centre? How do we make that space somewhere where people actually want to come and use, and then therefore businesses will flourish? And probably don't need to dig into environmental, because like I say, it's the one that people are really kind of familiar with. But, you know, how do we protect our planet? How do we preserve our resources? How do we create kind of circular systems and virtuous loops, that kind of idea of regeneration and constant improvement that Nye started kind of touching on?
But why do we care? That's an important question. So as designers, you know, we created the world that we live in. We've really sort of fueled this sort of consumption that we have today, and the things that we wear, the things we buy, and the things we use have all been perfectly designed to make you buy them and make you buy them in volume. And as counter to that, you know, as designers, we then have a responsibility to make that a better version, to actually create a more conscious consumption. So the things that we wear, the things we buy, and the things we use can have, you know, a better impact, and have less impact, can be more socially responsible, can have better use of our resources, you know, last longer, so we're not constantly buying the new thing every year. They have a bit more longevity. They have a bit of a better end of life, so they're more recyclable, they're more circular. All these sort of things that we as designers can think about in terms of when we come to actually creating a better choice and a better consumption. And at HECO, we believe that design has the power to shape a brighter future for all of us by creating an equal balance between people, planet, and prosperity.
So just to kind of build on that and give some more examples, we think that, you know, as designers, as strategists, you know, as creatives, whatever that our kind of role within, you know, agencies are, there's so many ways in which we can kind of change the world, which sounds very ideological. But, you know, we can actually help take cars and lorries off the road. So that might be working with electric vehicle brands, that might be working with underground delivery systems that are kind of carbon neutral, so that we don't have to think about logistics in the same way that we do. And, you know, that design thing is kind of a really broad term that could be kind of conceptualizing what these ideas are, or it can simply be making them kind of seem appealing, making people buy into them, putting them in a package that people understand or think, hey, yeah, that does sound a lot better than the state of play at the moment. I am going to switch to, you know, whatever you're talking about. It's really diverse in terms of the impact that you can play, you know, as a designer, as a strategist. You know, it could be conceptualizing city bikes, so that people kind of, you know, exercise, use bikes a lot more rather than vehicles. Or like I say, it could be kind of just creating a brand for them and making them super appealing. And then, you know, if we achieve that and we remove kind of vehicles off the road, designers also have an opportunity to reimagine what those roads are repurposed for. You know, do they then become these community spaces? Do they become playgrounds, or, you know, something else completely different? And, you know, can we get to a place where cities are redesigned and reimagined and made more kind of efficient and sustainable, so that people don't live in kind of tower blocks and have to own grumpy cats that aren't allowed to go outside? Everyone can have a dog. You don't have to, but you can, because there's all these green spaces that we've created, pocket parks. Maybe even this is actually on a rooftop of a skyscraper, but we're using kind of space in a different way. So it's really, really broad in terms of kind of how sustainability can be kind of applied through design. We work with a lot of kind of big corporate companies, but, you know, is there a world where we move away from those big conglomerates where their supply chain might not be traceable? Maybe it's not ethical at all. Maybe it's not sustainable. Like I said at the top, businesses are absolutely having to move towards that, but we're not there yet. So how can design kind of play a role in the types of sort of products that we buy, but also the way in which we buy them, whether that's through, you know, e-commerce and, you know, digital technology that puts us in touch with, you know, local growers, or whether it's actually by creating a platform and a brand identity for these smaller brands and kind of getting them out there and making sure that you know about them, so that you can seek them out and choose the more sustainable option over just, you know, the mass one that you're always used to picking up in the supermarket. You know, part of our job is identifying these kind of stories, and, you know, if there is this local grower, let's call this guy Tom, then we can give Tom a platform. We can create a brand that connects customers to that sort of personalized individual, so that there's kind of more choice. And thinking about, you know, that farm to fork sort of story, and how we give people access to that. We can help people to move away from kind of drinking dairy, or maybe it's eating meat completely, and we're working with kind of vegan brands that are, you know, coming up with a new plant-based technology. And again, how do we kind of package that up and incentivize people to that maybe always eat meat to maybe try a little bit less and try a little bit of plant-based one kind of night a week. These small steps that make kind of incremental change. Something that's really interesting to us is this idea of moving away from, you know, consumerism, that capitalist idea that you have to sort of own two of everything. And I'm going to hold my hands up. This isn't a picture of my wardrobe, but it could be. I'm very guilty of this. I'm trying to change. But actually to the sharing economy, where you don't have to own everything, you rent it. So, you know, is this a capsule collection of clothes that I've got for my autumn winter season? I wear those and then I return them, or I recycle them, or there's some sort of circular system that means you don't have to own stuff. How can we kind of help businesses think about these types of ideas? Because there's some companies that we work with where it's like they're on a sustainability journey. There are things that they're doing, but perhaps they're only one step ahead. And part of our job is to help them think 10 steps ahead. It's not just about changing your packaging to being fully recyclable. Actually, it's about how do you completely shift your business model to pivot towards something that is radically kind of more sustainable, you know, breaking kind of the current systems of what they're doing and kind of reimagining where they could get to in the future. So yeah, it's a little bit about what are the small things that we can do, how can we make this more appealing, but also about that bigger picture, what is the innovation and kind of what is that long-term end goal that we can help you move towards.
So how do we do it? So this is a little bit of an extension on everything that Charlie's just sort of spoken about. It is about working with brands to design sustainable futures, not just to create better products that are sustainable, but to actually create better products in general, not that embed sustainability, because it's one thing to have a product that is more sustainable, but it needs to be embraced. It needs to be a product that people want to use, that is desirable, that actually has an impact. And as part of that, then it has challenges that you need to overcome. Challenges maybe at shelf in competition with the consumer. Maybe it's part of their supply chain and distribution. Maybe it's just in the messaging. Maybe there's an educational component that needs to be brought into play. And following into that, then what are those stories that about sustainability that the brand has that you can bring out that's authentic and transparent, that maybe talks about traceability? How do you communicate those stories to the consumer and bring out the best in the brand and the product that it's trying to capture? And then part of that overcoming change is really the second component. The brands are you're working with brands to create a better choice, but then that choice needs to be accessible and embraced by the consumer. So how do you encourage the consumer to embrace that positive choice? Well, it might require education. It might be that your product that brand's created is plastic, but actually it's not just plastic, it's bioplastic. But the consumer doesn't necessarily instantly see that difference at shelf. So maybe it requires a messaging component around it to explain why this bioplastic is actually positive for the planet, that it's capturing plastic on the way to landfill, and it's actually recycling it, building in a bit of a circular economy, making a positive impact on the planet. And maybe that component then needs to be educated to the consumer in order for them to understand why the product that they're being offered is a better choice. It might also be brand influencing behaviors. We can have light touch influence with image on here talks about only leave your footprints. Maybe is a little bit of a call to action on the side of a pack, just saying, hey, I'm paper, you can recycle me. Maybe it's just slightly nudging them to make choices and behaviors that they wouldn't naturally think about without prompt. And then in a bit more of a bigger scale, it's creating new norms in society. It's making those everyday choices, those positive choices, a bit natural, a bit sort of like everyday. So it's a new normal, basically. That positive consumption becomes a bit sort of embedded. And on the innovation side, that means exploring potential solutions, exploring new ideas and new ways of working, new materials. It's about helping brands navigate transformation. As Charlie said, we're not there yet, but there's definitely pressure on brands to change. And for some brands, for smaller brands, that sustainability might be embedded very much from the seed. Maybe as a bigger brand, maybe more established, it requires a lot more pivoting. Their infrastructure is much bigger. It takes a much longer time to change. It might be a bit evolutionary, it might be radical, but they need help navigating those changes and challenges and communicating that change as well to the consumer. And also part of our job is to think about the future and to have to design a bit of a vision, a bit of a North Star that can inspire brands and give them a direction to head to, something that sort of envisions what their brand could be like in 10, 15, 20 years, and what the behaviors of consumers, how the consumers change, how markets and competition changes in that time, and what are the needs of society in 15 years' time, what does the brand need to look like to be relevant? So we have a handful of case studies for you. So the first one we're going to touch on is jellyfish, which talks about that the state of the world today with with rising sea waters, temperatures, the jellyfish populations actually sort of exploded, and some of the researchers at the University of Denmark created a new technology that turns these sort of invasive jellyfish species into crisps. And this very much sort of aligns with this idea and this trend towards planet positive diets. And we were quite inspired by that, and we thought we could create a bit of a speculative project about how we can brand these snacks and give them a bit of taste appeal. So we took inspiration from the influence of Japanese culture and Korean culture that's sort of very much on trend in the West, and playing into the idea of manga and this killer kaiju concept that we came up with. And we built a campaign around these sort of almost like alien invasion style, the taste odyssey. They're coming, building up a little bit of suspense, and then announcing them with a secondary campaign that sort of brings them out and celebrates the sort of pack. So we have a little bit of taste odyssey, fighting for sustainable foods. We sort of gave the sort of like War of the Worlds style manga concept on pack, and gave them a bit of a spice twist. So sea salt and sweet soy. Channel your inner hunger into these tangy crisps and join us on the frontier of sustainable eating. So educating the consumer about what the problem of jellyfish is, so that it disrupts local ecosystems. They spread to every part of the globe, and it's a bit of an infinite source of food. So it's trying to educate the consumer, make it exciting and interesting, and also because jellyfish are very much a staple of diets in the East. It's less common over in the West. How do we make it sort of interesting and accessible, get people to try it, and sort of nudge a bit of perception in consumers? And then we've got our full 3 SKUs. We've got a sweet salt and sea salt and sweet soy, as we said, wasabi and miso for a bit more of a punch, and then to make your eyes really water, chili and ginger with a bit of a laser beam effect.
Cool. So the next one we wanted to talk about really different in terms of, I suppose, the approach and the aesthetic is English Tea Shop. No guesses for what these guys do, but yeah, this was kind of where they were at in terms of their identity when they came to us. So quite pretty in terms of the designs, but not really saying too much about kind of the product inside. Why should I buy that over Twinings? They're not really giving me a reason. So as we started to kind of speak to them and learn more about them, they are a Sri Lankan company. They grow all of their tea over there. We started to kind of unearth this really lovely, really rich story about how they produce the tea, their kind of sustainable practices, their communities. And the picture on the right hand side that you can see is actually our creative director, Nigel. He went over to Sri Lanka with our MD Nick to just kind of immerse in the brand and understand kind of on the ground exactly kind of how everything was operating, and see it firsthand, which is really, really valuable when we get the chance to do that. And yeah, they talk to the growers. You can obviously see Nigel in the field there picking some of the tea, and everyone is known by name. There's families that work there. There's whole sort of generations, grandma to kind of grandson, all working there, and have this they're treated with kind of like deep respect, ethical practices. And it felt like that was really the heart of the brand, and it was always there, but it wasn't there for any consumers to see. So that became sort of the crux of what we wanted to make the identity about. But another big part of it was community. So their kind of tea plantation in Sri Lanka is a huge employer for the region. So it really is this sort of epicenter of community, and they are, as well as their sort of sustainable practices, so making sure that they're respecting the land, that they're managing kind of their water usage, so that there's no negative impact for the people that have lived there, you know, for hundreds of years, and their kind of ancestors have lived there, but also putting kind of back into the community in a social sense. So educating their growers, having kind of training that they're able to take part in, and loads of sort of kind of leveling up and upskilling for growers, but also their families and people that aren't directly employed by English tea shops. So this really lovely, rich, authentic story. So that's kind of what we made the brand all about, this kind of idea of your tea loving community, you know, from these passionate growers all the way to kind of the end consumer who's they love tea and they're going to really enjoy that delicious cup, but knowing that it's come from somewhere really kind of responsible and positive. So also this story of kind of farm to cup, which you know, touched on earlier. Sorry, my pop-ups, but also just trying to kind of bring that idea of storytelling into the visual identity. So you can see we work with a really lovely illustrator to bring kind of everything to life, make it feel kind of really personal, really handcrafted, because that's exactly what this brand is all about. And you can see kind of some of the pack designs here. So really celebrating that sort of circularity, using symbolism from Sri Lankan culture, bringing our illustrations into the teapot, and it feels like it actually sort of makes it feel a lot more premium, even though we're not using any like premium hues. It's not got gold leaf on it, it's not got crowns on it, but actually talking about that sustainability story really elevates it. It makes it something that, you know, you want to try and want to be part of. And we've worked with them over kind of all of their different varieties, their different types of teas. And then it came to, I think it was about Christmas time, the time when people want to start giving gifts. And they were like, well, how can we do this? How can we create something that people want to give to a loved one, that feels kind of like a really lovely present, but isn't suddenly super kind of unsustainable? Because if you think about classic gifting, you've got, you know, your tins, your excessive kind of plastic, all of the pump and stuff that makes it feel like it's a lovely gift, but is, you know, gets thrown straight in the bin and, you know, isn't recyclable half of the time. So how can they do that in a responsible way? So we kind of came up with a number of different concepts for the packaging, and the one that moved forward was this idea of a kind of a modular system, so you can have all of your little teas in a kind of cardboard wraparound, so it still looks really lovely, and it's got this idea of sort of sharing, of bringing people together, almost, you know, everyone gathering around the box to try the different kind of flavors. So it has purpose, it has story, but then all of the packaging can be sustainable and recyclable. And you can see kind of on the left a little bit of a visual of how that looks. So it's different pieces that stack together, but it's all about that idea of like coming together, that craftsmanship, and that kind of storytelling in it. And the one on the right is another project. So looking at kind of solids, you know, how do we, if it's not kind of in a bag, how is that packaged up? And again, rather than that coming in kind of a foil wrapper, looking at a cardboard sort of wrap that goes around it, but also when you open it, it creates this really lovely experience, almost like petals kind of unfolding. And we call it win-win-win. Like if it's good for people, so I want to use that tea because it's such an amazing experience and it's beautiful and I love kind of engaging with it, that's a win for people. It's a win for planet because it's recyclable, it's, you know, it's carbon neutral, it's not having a negative impact. And then if you can kind of get those two things aligned, it creates a win for the business, so for prosperity, because if it's good for people and it's good for the planet, then presumably people are going to buy it and it's going to make money. So it's that kind of win-win-win that we try and achieve. And then the final one before we head to some questions is Reka. So this is an Icelandic vodka that we worked on. But before we kind of dig into what we did, just want to give you a tiny bit of theory, nothing too deep, don't worry. But a big kind of barrier to sustainable design and just sustainability sort of adoption in general is that what people want to do, what they intend to do, and what they actually do can be very different. So we all have those sort of great intentions of, you know, New Year's Eve, we've got our resolution, we're going to be in the gym, we're going to be on that health kick. And what do we actually do? We're on the sofa binging Netflix and eating Ben and Jerry's. So we don't always follow through with the things that we want to do, even if we are really incentivized to do it. And that's really true when we look at sustainability. So, you know, you've got your kind of eco activists that are, you know, right at the kind of vanguard. They're really kind of hot on this topic, and, you know, they have an intention to buy sustainable products, and they do it. Great. But if you look at that middle one, eco considerers, people that, you know, they want to make responsible choices, they think that they will, there's this massive gap between what they actually do. For some reason, that's not converting through to action. So this is a kind of challenge that we try and incorporate in our thinking when working on sustainable projects, and I guess projects in general, to be honest, because if we can kind of close that intention action gap, make people follow through with what they want to do, then we've kind of got the holy grail, and we're going to look at a significant percentage of the population suddenly making more responsible choices. So how do we do that? Well, instead of trying to be idealistic and appealing to people's better nature, let's just appeal to people's human nature, their actual kind of lizard brain. So this is where nudge design comes in. So it basically combines design thinking, so how do we make things really appealing, and nudge theory, which is this idea that we can kind of, through subtle kind of cues, mostly sort of imperceptible, you don't even necessarily notice them half of the time, we can kind of actually try and close that intention gap and nudge people towards making better choices. So this is the framework for kind of nudge design. So essentially the idea that you need to make things easy, attractive, social, and timely if people are going to adopt it. So let's think about kind of eating less meat. How can we make it easy? Well, instead of saying, right, you need to be vegan from now, you say, well, why don't you just add less beef into your what is it, shepherd's pie, lasagna, and add some beans instead. It's this little switch that actually can make a difference, and it puts you on that kind of like journey towards better choices. Attractive, you know, how can we make it kind of this, you know, feel like this great experience, create kind of like this positive sort of feedback from actually making these better choices. So, for example, kind of connecting blockchain to how things are produced. So you're able to kind of really see where everything's come from. You can see the growers, and you can kind of form those relationships with people that you care about. Social. So if you can make something social, if you can make it feel like, okay, this is something that everyone's doing, this is a community, like Burger King are doing it. Oh, even Burger King. Okay, then maybe I need to be eating a little less meat. It's almost like the idea of peer pressure, that idea that like I need to kind of be doing what everyone else is doing. And then timely, you know, speaking to people at the right time when they're making these choices. So everyone's kind of a bit familiar with like veganuary now, but if you are trying to get people to eat less meat, that is the time you want to be speaking to them, because that's the time when they're probably teetering, do I, don't I? And hopefully you can kind of push them over the edge. So we applied that theory to Reka vodka. So as I mentioned, Icelandic vodka, it was actually created because they identified a gap in the market. They were like, there's Finlandia, we've got Finnish vodka, we've got kind of all these kind of Nordic vodkas, but Iceland doesn't have a vodka. That feels like something that is quite different and could be commercially successful, but they didn't necessarily have their roots in Iceland. So this was their sort of supply chain that they came to us with. You can see that the grains are moving kind of all around the world in order to get to a place where they have this this glass bottle, which, you know, incidentally is a really like unsustainable way to be transporting something. It's heavy and it's moving kind of all over the place. And the only part of their sort of vodka that was actually made in Iceland, as you can see, is that sort of number 4 where they distilled it. So there was a bit of a sort of a credibility story to try and kind of weave in, as well as how can we take this supply chain and make it more sustainable. Another thing that we sort of had to battle against with this brand is that there were these really kind of ingrained cues of what a premium vodka is. You can see, you know, Grey Goose, Belvedere, Absolute, they're, you know, most alcohol is in a glass bottle, but in vodka particularly, you know, they're really elongated, they're frosted, they have, you know, etchings in them, lots of blues for those kind of like icy vistas that conjures up freshness and flavor. So that's almost what the consumer's expecting from a premium vodka brand. How do we sort of rip up the rule book and kind of try and rewrite these codes, because these are not sustainable at all. We need to move to something different. So these are some of the kind of different concepts that we created for a much more sustainable pack. So the ones that we wanted to move forward with and were the most sustainable are the pulp ones that you can see. But when we went through consumer testing, it was not seen as appealing in any way. Consumers were like, no, it looks cheap. I wouldn't want to drink that. It doesn't look pure. Basically, all of the negative things you can think of, which you don't want to hear at consumer testing. Oops, sorry. So we needed to do something a little bit drastic to shift that perception, because as a brand, they needed to be more sustainable. So we explored the idea of the puffin. I don't know how up on puffins or Iceland you guys are. Hope no one's an expert, but it's a native bird there, a little bit of a kind of an emblem for the country, but also a bird that's habitat is threatened. So it's sort of under threat. So it felt like, is this a way to bring a little bit more Icelandic credibility by associating ourselves with a bird that is native, but also how can we use this to make kind of our pulp pack more easy, attractive, social, probably not so much timely, but definitely the others from the East framework. So what we did was create a campaign that sat around the pulp bottle, just sort of connecting it to the Icelandic landscape, to the puffin, but also a campaign where, you know, with each bottle that you buy, you're adopting a puffin, so money will go back into the preservation of them. And you know, this is literally the visual that we showed in our consumer testing. And all of a sudden the feedback was, yes, I would definitely buy this. I would love to take it to a party and tell all my friends the story that sits behind it, that, you know, did you know that this bottle has adopted a puffin over in Iceland? This feels really premium. So this is a really good example of that little nudge. We're not changing anything fundamental, you know, it's just a little kind of subtle suggestion that this is kind of connected to something good, something social, something attractive. So it works. And that is the end of our presentation. I don't know if there's anything in the chat. Let me come out and stop sharing. I apologize for a few random pop-ups that you might have seen telling me to do timesheets and join meetings. That's the joy of agency life. But yeah, over to you guys if anyone has any questions.
Can I just ask Charlie what your background is academically?
Oh, so I actually studied philosophy at university, so a little bit of an unusual journey for me. I've traveled through sort of events, marketing agencies, design, until kind of ultimately landing in strategy. I graduated during the credit crunch, so I took a little bit of a circuitous route, but yeah. Any other questions? I'm guessing there's nothing in the chat. No.
Nothing in the chat. I mean, there is some really, really interesting, that win-win-win. That's a really nice thing to think about. Are you hitting when looking at designing a project? It's a really nice thing to maybe ask pupils moving forward. I'm not a teacher myself. Does any of the teachers think that would be quite good in the workshop, in the design room? Yeah, there's some really nice ones. Yeah. And there was also East. I thought that was really interesting. Is it something that could be used in the classroom, do you think? I'm nearly said ladies, but I know there's some gentlemen there. Sorry, gentlemen, I couldn't see you. Do you think that would be something that's possible? Don't know.
I don't know how to actually raise the hand. Hello, I've actually spoke to my students this week when we started the new project in year 10 DT, and we obviously used a lot of sustainability. We followed Edica's example, and we talked about the circular economy a lot as the start of our first project, and I throw a question in the air about future of, for example, clothing. We focus on textiles in our department, and how do the young students think about the idea of actually renting or hiring a clothes? And it was absolutely big no. They just found it so like disgusting, appalling, and it's like, no way, why would I like go and the rent, there's normal clothes. Obviously they understood special occasion wear, like a wedding dresses and that, but they really felt strongly still about that they want to own clothes. And I was really shocked, because we have talked about sustainability already for quite a lot in our school and in a lower school projects, but it seems to be really tough a topic to change that habit and behavior. So how do we do that? How can we enthuse and change the young people's mind? I'm talking about 14, 15, 16 years olds.
Yeah. I think, I mean, that feels like a perfect candidate for the sort of the nudge idea that we were just talking about with Reka. Like, if there's, a perception of something feeling, oh, okay, that's going to be unclean, or I want to own them because they're part of my identity, they're an extension of me as a person, or they're coveted things. I love to collect my limited edition trainers. I like to queue up in Soho for hours and get the latest like Yeezys, whatever. I don't know. I'm sounding like a grandma now, aren't I? But it's, how do we then make that feel easy, make it feel attractive, make it a social thing? Like, is there a community that we can create around this sort of rental system, rather than it just being like, eBay, where you're buying it from mass market? Is it more of a kind of collectors clubs for really discerning individuals that are really passionate about whatever that kind of item of clothing is? Now, I know that you're a bit of a kind of fashion buff. I don't know if there's anything around kind of like NFTs and your work there that you wanted to mention as well.
I think that it's a really interesting question, and I think that's particularly interesting to watch how the fashion industry shifts and tries to explore new ways of thinking around sustainability. Well, we have the idea of The renting is definitely one particular aspect. You have resale and that sort of idea being a second. There's also the sort of shift towards buying less, so consuming less and buying better. So you spend more on items, you keep them for longer. So there's lots of ways to sort of tackle sustainability. I suppose to Charlie's points, how do you nudge behavior and change perception? It's also about making things accessible. So what are the barriers? What do people not like about renting? What is it? Is it that it's more convenient just to buy? And if so, then how do you sort of tackle those barriers head on and say, well, actually, it's a bit educational, right? It's like, how do we change your mind? How do we show you that actually it can be just as exciting and actually give you access to clothes that are really aspirational? Maybe you don't need, you can wear Dior or whatever, like you can go into like really high-end fashion and wear that, but you don't have to purchase it. It doesn't have to cost you as much, but you can still sort of feel amazing for like that one evening, one day or whatever. So maybe you can shift how you think about the clothes that you wear, and all those things take time, and they take a little bit of creativity as well.
Yeah, and we've got a good comment from Jessica in the chat of, we can use influencers and celebrities. We know that they can, if you select the right sort of person, can carry quite a lot of kind of weight and, influence. That's why they're called influencers. But I think it's about, who, first of all, if you were, let's say you were an independent designer, but you decided that actually I'm going to create a model where it is rental basis, or whether you're a big brand, it's about first of all, who am I trying to sort of target with my clothes? And then, as Nai was saying, what are those sort of barriers? What are those obstacles that we or objections that we need to overcome? And then therefore, who is an appropriate kind of celebrity or influencer that we can partner with, that we know that specific group are going to sort of trust and engage with? Because clearly, if that's mismatched and the group that you're trying to appeal to don't care about this person and wouldn't follow anything they say, then it's not going to be effective. So it's sort of matching up that strategy based on kind of, who you're talking to and what you want them to sort of think, feel and do, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's also another element that we probably don't necessarily consider so much in our little own bubble. But when we talk about sustainability is not even across the globe. Consumers in different regions think about sustainability in different ways. In some societies, rent is standard. Like you don't really own property. Maybe a rental system with clothing and fashion would be also natural. In some other cultures, it is different. So it's kind of trying to find the right fit for each particular region, each particular type of society. How do people consume in that region? What do they like? What they dislike? What is the sustainable version for them? And it's just finding the right fit, and also trying to eliminate those barriers.
Yeah, and just reading some comments from Alison and Susan in the chat talking about Love Island. So rather than being, I think they were was it Boohoo before or Pretty Little Thing? But anyway, they were sponsored by a fast fashion brand with an absolutely terrible track record, but also massively sort of called out for their practices in Leicester, I think it was. So, shifting towards eBay, but and that seems to have been kind of reasonably successful. Obviously, it will take a while to kind of see how that actually impacts eBay and the idea of kind of recycled clothing in general. But just wanted to talk about sort of greenwashing, which actually we didn't mention, but is obviously a big issue and really prevalent when we talk about sustainability. And I guess the counterpoint to the eBay sponsorship would be that Pretty Little Thing, who have had associations with various different sort of Love Island kind of contestants, launched their own kind of recycle, reuse platform that was just essentially eBay. And there's been kind of a lot of backlash because what they haven't done, they've sort of papered over the practices and the supply chain and the ethics that they've been called out on, and just launched this platform, almost kind of ignoring all of the negative press, not addressing it at all, deciding, do you know what, people have forgotten about that, let's pop this up there, they're going to love it. And people have gone, no, well, hang on a minute, like, you can't just paper over the cracks. So a big part of this is making sure that anything that you do is sort of defensible, that it's true. Like, you don't, as a brand, you don't have to say, I'm the most, I'm carbon neutral and I'm leading the charge and I'm a sustainability activist, but you have to be honest about what you're doing. You can't have a piece of the sort of, the green pound without putting in the work. Just seeing if there's any other. Vegan leather, yeah, it's really interesting as well, kind of all of the new materials, like thinking about fashion again, like there's, and also I guess sort of food and drink as well, there's some amazing stuff happening with kind of lab grown kind of synthesized meat, or textiles made of kind of like fungus. And I think we're going to see more and more the sort of the gap between choices narrow. So it's like, maybe I don't want to give up beef today because I love a steak, but maybe I can give up burgers because the technology has got to a point where actually that switch is so easy that it's almost imperceptible. You've got some, Beyond Meat, you've got Impossible Burgers. There's so many kind of great options, and all it's going to take for me to fully switch is for that jump to be a little bit narrower, a little bit easier. And I think the same thing with fashion. Like, I think we'll see a rapid kind of expansion of these technologies coming online. And then I think you'd almost be crazy. Why would you buy the leather bag when you've got the same quality mushroom bag and you've got the sort of that social aspect as well? So you can say, hey guys, this is actually, did you love my bag? It's actually a mushroom, it suddenly has that cachet and that kudos. So yeah, we're sure it's going to get kind of super kind of prevalent as we move forward. I think we're at the end, aren't we?